Today, President Biden vowed to fix the supply chain backlog that has stranded scores of cargo ships loaded with clothes, computers, and other goods. The Port of Los Angeles will now be open 24/7, and top CEOs promised to expand their warehouse hours. This number tells it all. The price of shipping one container from China to the West Coast went from $3,000 last year to $20,000 last month. It is a big reason why consumer prices jumped more than 5% since last year. Well, if there's a silver lining, it's this. Because of inflation, those receiving Social Security will see their payments jump nearly 6% next year. It's the biggest increase in 39 years. CBS's Carter Evans is following the situation at the West Coast ports, but we're going to begin with CBS's Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Nora. The president saying that these moves are designed to speed up the delivery of goods all across the countries. The White House tonight keenly aware that any big issues with the backlog could severely affect the holiday shopping season and potentially the president's political standing.
This is a big first step in speeding up the movement of materials and goods through our supply chain.
The Port of Los Angeles, the nation's largest, will now operate around the clock, along with the nearby Port of Long Beach. Together, they handle about 40% of the country's container traffic, carrying laptops, TVs, and toys, and holiday gifts, soon to be in higher demand.
The commitments being made today are a sign of major progress in moving goods from manufacturers to a store or to your front door.
CEOs from top retail and delivery companies who met with the president today pledged to work more off-peak hours to clear the cargo. Can this administration guarantee that holiday packages will arrive on time?
We are not the Postal Service or UPS or FedEx. We cannot guarantee. What we can do is use every lever at the federal government disposal to reduce delays.
The supply chain headaches have sparked product shortages, longer delivery times, and inflation, with price increases up 5% from last year, impacting shoes, appliances, and groceries. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen told Nora it won't end soon.
But I don't mean to suggest that these pressures will disappear in the next month or two.
All of these factors pushing consumer confidence down and increasing pressure on the president.
As a consumer, it's going to make you feel rotten. And when you feel rotten as a consumer, you take it out on whoever's in office. And that is what this administration is going to have to deal with.
In his remarks today, the president warned the federal government might take bolder steps if the private sector doesn't step up to address the backlog concerns. And if you're concerned about deliveries making it in time for the holidays, retailers say you should start ordering packages now to ensure they arrive by December. Nora?
I bet you're ordering right now, Ed, at the White House. Thank you. All right, tonight, one word sums up the feeling along every line of the supply chain: frustration. That goes for retailers, truck drivers, and especially customers. CBS's Carter Evans takes a closer look from the Port of Los Angeles.
This is what a broken supply chain looks like from the air. Nearly 60 cargo ships floating outside the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. They're carrying about 250,000 containers that workers will soon be unloading around the clock. Truckers at the Port of LA sometimes have to line up for hours just to pick up one container. And then where do they take them? Most warehouses are full, and that's delaying deliveries even further.
Because they're working too slow inside.
Trucker Manassas Gonzalez doesn't get paid by the hour. He gets paid by the load. How long are the waits here to pick up a load sometimes?
7 to 9 hours. Like these hours, they're not counting.
Clearing the backlog may take months. It could be the end of 2022 before things get back to normal. Normal being a ship enters the port, offloads, and departs with no delays.
It's a good first step, but we need to see further downstream logistics, rail, all has to fire at same time for it to become very efficient.
They're not going to be able to wave the magic wand and make this go away.
There is no magic wand. It's a huge bottleneck.
At the end of the supply chain are store owners like Tony Yabica, whose bike shop is just down the street from the backed-up port. When we met him a month ago, Yabica was waiting for a bike order he made a year ago. Do you know when those bikes are going to come in?
No, not really.
And all those kids' bikes that you're waiting for, where are they?
They're either on those ships or maybe they're still in Asia, but they're not in warehouses.
Now, dock workers tell me they are all for this 24-hour port plan. In fact, they say they've been wanting to do it for years, and it's in their current contract that they can work 24 hours. They're just waiting for terminal operators here at the port to tell them when to start. Nora?
Time to turn on that switch. Carter Evans, thank you. Well, now to another big story we're following. Science fiction became science fact for actor William Shatner today. At 90 years old, Star Trek's Captain Kirk became the oldest person to travel to space, and he was clearly moved by the experience. CBS's Mark Strassman was there to witness it all.
Has cleared the tower. She is on her space with the second human spaceflight crew.
This was the voyage of the Blue Origin spaceship First Step. Its 10-minute mission, space.
Oh, Jesus.
William Shatner's latest frontier, up almost 66 miles to the edge of space.
And here come the mains.
And right back down again, like same-day shipping.
And capsule touchdown.
A gift from Amazon and Blue Origin founder Jeff Bezos.
It was so moving to me. This experience has been something unbelievable.
55 years ago, Shatner's Captain Kirk led a starship of galactic hopscotchers. Today, he became Kirk, and at 90, overcome by the moment.
Everybody in the world needs to see the, it was unbelievable, unbelievable. I mean, you know, the little things of weightlessness, but to see the blue color go whoop by, and now you're staring into blackness. What you have given me is the most profound experience I can imagine. I'm so filled with emotion about what just happened. It's extraordinary, extraordinary.
All the crew cried after landing.
I hope I never recover from this.
Captain Kirk's a fictional figure. I'm flesh and blood.
You're flesh and blood. You came back clearly moved.
Tremendously, enormously.
Shatner's reaction was so memorable, Blue Origin could turn it into a commercial, hoping to reel in more paying customers. Shatner's ticket was comped. Another shrewd investment by Jeff Bezos. Nora?
And a prime trip. Mark Strassman, thank you. Well, tonight, warnings of a possible twindemic of both COVID and the flu. The CDC estimates an average of 36,000 people died of the flu each year over the past decade. And there are fears this season could be a bad one. Here's CBS's Janet Shamlian.
Tonight, the race is on to get shots into arms as health officials warn of a potentially devastating flu season colliding with the pandemic.
Should we have a tremendously bad flu season, how could that impact the COVID situation?
If we have a serious influenza outbreak on top of COVID-19, we potentially are going to overwhelm the healthcare system.
That's why in Little Rock, at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, there's a new strategy.
That was quick.
A one-stop shop for flu shots and COVID vaccines at this clinic. The CDC says people can safely receive both at the same time.
Well, I appreciate you doing this.
Andrew Ben's got a COVID booster in his right arm.
Here's your flu shot? Yes, sir.
And the flu shot in his left.
COVID is like a wildfire right now, and I want to
Here, Councillor Essaibi, George. According
Request
to
Friday
research
and Moderna's tomorrow.
by the Dukakis
All right,
Center
tonight
for
we're
Urban
in
and Regional
Montana,
Policy,
where just 57% of those
Boston's
eligible
rental
are fully
properties are
vaccinated.
single
The
units
state now has
owned
the
by small
highest
landlords.
hospitalization
During
rate
the
in the
pandemic,
country.
these landlords have
CBS's
accounted
Meg Oliver
for just
reports from Billings.
34% of evictions.
Hillary,
and nearly 40%
your mom is
of
up
them
there.
offered rent
On the other
deferment
side of
plans to their tenants. If small landlords are more likely to be part of the solution than part of the problem, as these numbers suggest, what will you do to protect them from bankruptcy and incentivize more tenant-friendly behavior? 1 minute, please.
Well, certainly housing is too expensive for too many Bostonians. I am committed to making sure that this city is a place for everyone who wants to call Boston home, home. Regardless of what their accent is, Boston should be a place for anyone who wants to be here. Certainly we have to find deeper affordability. Certainly we have to create, and I'm committed to creating, more first-time home buyer opportunities for our city's residents, especially first-generation home buyers, families who have been here for generations, who have not had an opportunity to set down roots and own a piece of this city. That is my commitment to the people of Boston. We also have to invest in our Boston Public Housing Authority. We have 48,000 families on a wait list today. We are only housing 800 at a time. The city, under my administration, will step up, invest in public housing, making sure that our most vulnerable, our lowest income families are taken care of. That is an answer, is part of the solution to family homelessness in this city, which I have led on. I have brought that conversation to City Hall, to the City Council, and will continue to lead on it as mayor.
Councillor Wu, 1 minute.
We've seen during the pandemic just how fundamental housing is. Housing is health, safety, opportunity, in many cases, your connection to community and the ties that you have. I get to live in a two-family home upstairs with my husband and 2 boys. My mom is downstairs, and we're able to be in a multi-generational situation that provides so many supports. We are seeing families further and further separated from their supports, pushed out of Boston. Nearly 2/3 of our residents are renters, and we're seeing that 1/3 of those renters are paying more than half their income every single year just to keep a roof over their head, making tough, impossible decisions about how to choose between food on the table or keeping a home. Our small landlords are certainly part of the solution to ensure that we can partner, keep people in their homes. City government needs to play a much more proactive role, directing resources to keeping people in their communities and ensuring that we are simplifying our processes so that we can build more affordable housing while our residents can stay and thrive.
Rebuttal.
So I'm going to say very clearly that Councillor Wu, Michelle, does not believe in the power of that small landlord. She wants to install and state rent control in this city. That will create further disinvestment in our city, that will keep rents high and push our city's residents further and further away from community, from job centers, from schools, and from future opportunity. Rent control is not the answer. It is not the fix to the challenge here in the city. And I'd like to understand how Michelle will put rent control in place here in the city of Boston and how she'll protect those small landlords that are such an important part of our city.
Response.
We can't be afraid and listen to scare tactics around what our residents need right now. You can knock on doors in any neighborhood in the city. You can go to any community meeting, and people are coming up to both of us saying how afraid they are that they can't afford to stay in the communities they've helped build and grow. Everything should be on the table when it comes to addressing our housing crisis, especially when it comes to addressing our crisis of displacement. We will do everything possible. I'll make sure as mayor that we're putting dollars into building affordable housing, using city-owned buildings and land to add more units, boost home ownership, simplify our processes. But that's not enough. It's not enough to sit back and wait while families get pushed out. We need rent stabilization to keep people in their homes and address the emergency of displacement that is all across our city.
Go ahead.
Is there a difference between rent stabilization and rent control? I don't believe there is. It's an exercise that we have tried, and it has failed here in the city of Boston, and it has failed in so many other places. We have to build more affordable housing in this city. We have to create those direct pipelines to ownership in the city, and we as a city need to invest in down payment assistance and work with organizations like MAHA to make sure that our city's residents are prepared to buy that first home and have the technical assistance to keep that first home. We also have to get to the conversation around wealth. Our city has too many Bostonians, and those are the ones that we hear from day in and day out, that have not been a part of the growth of this city. That's the work that we need to make sure that every one of our Bostonians can put more money in their pocket. This city owes it to them.
Equal time.
I'm going to make sure as mayor that we are using every bit of power that we have in city government to address the challenges that our residents are facing, the burdens that are on the shoulders of our families. I was at Georgetown Homes in Hyde Park, standing with residents on the verge of eviction, trying their best to organize and not knowing if they could seek the improvements they needed for health and safety in their apartments because they were so afraid of losing what they already had. It is not enough to simply dismiss policy because it's too complicated or we're scared about what the unintended consequences might be. Let's have that conversation. Let's make sure that everything is on the table. There are cities and states across the country right now who are pairing rent stabilization in concert with many other tools. I will fight for Boston to have everything that we need, and at a minimum, that includes keeping families in their homes.
Briefly, because I want to move on.
The rent control effort has to happen at the State House. We today in the city of Boston have an incredible Office of Housing Stability that we need to make sure that each one of our city's residents has an opportunity to access. The dollars are there, and we've got federal funds coming in that I'm committed to investing in our communities to help our city's residents stay in their home. Rent control, rent stabilization is a state effort. This is about the city of Boston. This is about our city's people and the work that we will do together to create that affordable housing, create those pathways to ownership, protect our seniors, and make sure that our families can call this place home.
Final word on this for now.
Fighting for what our city residents need means leaning into the ways that we are able not only to take action within city government, but to partner with all levels of government. I'm proud of my track record of doing so, of working together with our state legislators, with federal legislators, to push the conversation and to deliver resources right to our residents on housing, on transportation, on climate, on jobs. Boston needs that partnership, and now is a moment, with resources coming for our recovery, with momentum and political will, to lean in and grab hold of those partnerships. That's why I'm so proud to have the support of so many of our partners in government, because we all know that we are in this together.
I want to get to another important issue before we reach the bottom of the hour in our break. Just a reminder, you are perfectly welcome to return to any one of these topics we've been discussing later on during your open discussion time. You'll go first here, Councillor Wu. We did solicit questions from the public, and a number of them came in. We hope to get to several. One question was submitted by a colleague and former competitor of yours, Andrea Campbell. Quote, kids living in Mattapan have only a 5% chance of getting into a high-quality Boston public school compared to other neighborhoods where it's as high as 80%. What specifically will you do to close that opportunity gap? 1 minute, please.
Well, thank you so much to our colleague and sister in service for all of her leadership and her passionate advocacy and leadership, particularly when it comes to fighting for our kids. This is an issue that my family is very personally invested in. My two boys are in Boston Public Schools. I have walked that tightrope of what it feels like to try to register for the right places and wait for the lottery. And this is my second round as a BPS mom, having raised my younger sister as her legal guardian through middle school and high school in BPS as well. We need to ensure that in this mecca of education, those resources, those opportunities are connecting with each of our young people. I'll ensure that there are improvements to our school assignment process that reflect equity, but more importantly, that we are investing in each one of our seats. We need to close the gap for early education and childcare, deliver universal pre-K so that our kids have the brightest start. We need to wrap around services with a children's cabinet that will ensure that we are delivering everything that our families need, rebuild our crumbling facilities, ensure health and safety, inspiring places to learn, and last but not least, really focus on vocational education so we are connecting young people to the jobs in our city.
Councillor Essaibi George, 1 minute.
So Michelle's done a great job listing the problems that we face in the Boston Public Schools. As a former classroom teacher, as the chair of education, as a BPS graduate, and a parent of 4 BPS students, I know the work that we need to do to get it all done. It is certainly thinking about the $1.3 billion we spend on our education system and how each one of those dollars is invested in a child. It's about grade reconfigurations, high school redesign, fixing our special education services, especially especially our sub-separate classrooms that disproportionately impact children of color. And it's also about early literacy. We need a strong early literacy program, a curriculum across all of our schools so that every school is high quality, that every experience is high quality, that there is no risk that you send your child to a less than good enough school. Good enough as it relates to our education system, as it relates to my responsibility as a parent, is not good enough. As a teacher, I know how to do this work. We want to fix the Boston Public Schools, hire a teacher, I'll get it done.
As we move into the open discussion here, Councillor Campbell specifically referenced Mattapan, where she lives. Why has Mattapan been getting the short end of the stick?
Mattapan and so many of our communities need additional resources. I've done the work as a member of the City Council to make sure that each of our schools has a full-time nurse, that each of our schools now has a full-time clinical social worker, that each of our schools gets the resources it needs to support our kids. It is unfortunate when any community goes without that experience for each and every one of our children.
Go ahead, Councillor.
I've visited every single Boston Public High School and sat for hours with our school leaders, our students, educators, school communities. And what you realize is that the gaps in our system, the disparities are heartbreakingly huge. You can feel as soon as you set foot into one of our schools how resourced it is, because the quality of the buildings, whether the lights work, whether there are shades on the windows, already corresponds to the resources that our young people are getting and our educators are getting when it comes to academic supports and everything else. We need equity to drive a vision of our schools, and we need stability and a plan that truly believes in the power of our public schools to make a difference in families' lives. In Mattapan, for example, we have seen schools shut down against the wishes of community members. We have seen advocacy from community that has not been heard. I'll make sure that our schools and our seats are in the right places for access across every single one of our neighborhoods. Put a Boston Public Schools mom in charge of our city, we will see some differences.
Response.
I agree. Put a Boston Public Schools mom in charge and we will see a difference, and add a teacher to that resume, and we've got a recipe for true success when we think about our schools, making sure that those resources are spent wisely and that we're utilizing not just the $1 billion that we've just invested in facilities that will touch 10 schools, that we are utilizing the infrastructure dollars coming in from the federal government into our Boston Public Schools. Yes, we have a crumbling school facilities infrastructure. Yes, we have work to do around our transportation budget and making sure that that $137 million that we spend on transportation is invested in student-facing services. We've got a great deal of work to do. So much of that I have started as a member of the City Council, work that we have achieved, that we've gotten done. The task list is long. Put a teacher in charge and a BPS mother in charge, and we will get that done.
Do you hear something you want to respond to there?
I'll just add that we can talk about big picture policies in the schools. We can talk about all the structural changes that we need. But at the end of the day, when your kids are in the school system, it is the little details that sometimes can have the biggest impact. That feeling of anxiety you feel when it's 80, 90 degrees outside and you're trying to fill up the water bottles to send them off to school because you know that the water fountains don't work in the school, or worrying about whether a bus might come on time, if at all. We need to get the operations right so that we can do all of the rest of it as well.
I've got to take our break, but I have time for one-word answers, just a yes or no question. Do you have confidence in the current superintendent, Councillor Wu?
I'll make sure that the mayor and superintendent partner together.
Councillor Essaibi.
I have confidence in the superintendent in partnership with me as mayor.
All right, candidates, thank you both. Take a breath, take a sip of water, and after a short break, we will continue. For those of you watching us on WBZ-TV, we invite you to continue watching on CBSN Boston. Just head to our website, cbsboston.com. We'll be back.
Day that defines our community.
This race is who we are.
And every year, WBZ is proud to be the only local station to bring you the Boston Marathon.
The best spot to watch the Boston Marathon. Excitement here in Hopkinton is building.
Capturing Boston today.
We've got fist bumps, we've got smiles.
It doesn't get any better than this.
WBZ.
Boston strong.
With you every step of the way.
It's the best feeling ever.
Fall can bring a lot of changes, so whatever this fall means for your mornings, WBZ News is here to start your day.
Good morning, and thanks for waking up with us. I'm Liam Martin.
And I'm Kate Merrill.
To get you up to speed.
Our top stories this morning, we have breaking news.
Out the door.
We do need to be rain ready for the morning hours.
And on your way.
Here's a live look at traffic right now.
It's Everything Boston, every morning, with your hometown news team.
Sign me up.
Kate, Liam, Brianna, and Zach. WBZ This Morning, weekdays from 4:30 to 7. Want to know what's happening around Boston?
The I-Team has uncovered new video.
Turn to the news team that knows this town best.
Now to a story you saw first on WBZ.
WBZ, Channel 4 News.
Tonight, a WBZ exclusive interview.
Take a look at this dangerous situation.
Safety issues on the MBTA.
For Everything Boston, every evening.
He is only telling his story to our chief investigator, Cheryl Fiantuck.
At 5, 6, 10, and 11. Turn to WBZ, First for News.
Welcome back to the first Boston mayoral debate. We continue now here on CBSN Boston, WBZ News Radio 1030, and C-SPAN. So candidates, in a new MassInc poll sponsored by WBUR, the Dorchester Reporter, and the Boston Foundation, 71% of black voters and 61% of Latino voters said reforming the Boston police was a major priority. But 65% of black voters and 63% of Latino voters also said getting tougher on crime was a major priority. We'll start with you here, Councillor Essaibi George. Give us a specific example of how you plan to meet both of those needs at the same time.
Well, I think it's actually one of the most important responsibilities that I have as mayor of this city. We need to ensure that our city is a safe city and a just city. That work is incredibly important. We need to make sure that we have a police department and a public safety agency that is responding to the needs of our city's residents, but that it is also transparent, that it is also accountable, that it is also diverse and reflective of the city it serves. That is central to my work. That has been central to my message, although some of that gets left out of many conversations. We've got so much work to do to fulfill what I call the promise of community policing, where our communities, our community-based organizations, our city's residents are in partnership with our police department, and that they are present, that they are engaged, and that they are doing the very important work of keeping our city safe. I believe in investing in public safety, not defunding our public safety agency and the work that we need to do as a city.
Councillor Wu, 1 minute.
As you mentioned, our residents are very concerned, and what Boston needs right now is solutions, not sound bites, not scare tactics. We need to make sure that we are doing the work in community, and I've been proud to lead the work on the council of ensuring that our crisis response focuses on the public health as a major way that we are leaning into safety. I am the caregiver for a mother who lives with mental illness. I have been in those situations with that loved one as the police were called in an episode of mental illness, and to feel the terror standing next to her of what might go wrong in an instant with an armed law enforcement officer there, begging to make sure that she went to the hospital instead of the police station. We need to ensure that our resources are being spent in the right way, delivering the services that our residents need. We need that public health-led response. We need accountability when it comes to budget as well as misconduct. We need transparency across our department. I will ensure that the choice of the new police commissioner is one that will deliver urgently on reforms that are needed to the structures, the culture of our department, and get going right away on that underlying barrier that holds much of this back, negotiating a new police union contract.
All right, I just want to clarify something before you move on with this.
Please do.
You mentioned, quote, defunding the police. That's a very charged term. Are you saying that's what you perceive your opponent as calling for?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So very first, I'd like to say that Michelle has not led on the reforms that are necessary, especially as it relates to a mental health response for our Boston Police Department in responding to the needs of our city's residents. When I joined the council in 2016, there were 2 best clinicians associated with this work. I worked with our former colleague to ensure that there are 4. 2 cycles ago, I worked to ensure that there are 19 clinicians doing the very important response of assisting our city's residents in need. This has impacted the experience at Mass and Cass. We still have a great deal of work to do in Mass and Cass, especially as it relates to women who are victims of violence. There's still a great deal of work we need to do in expanding the best clinicians across the Boston Police Department in partnership with BMC, but that is the work that I've led on as a member of the Boston City Council. I will also say we don't need to wait for a new commissioner to put in place the reforms that have been recommended by the Boston Police Task Force. That accountability task force has recommendations that are in place today, waiting for implementation. On day one, with or without a commissioner, we can put those recommendations in place, and I am committed to doing that.
Equal time, Councilor Wu.
I'm grateful for Councilor Essaibi George's leadership and advocacy to make sure that we have grown the number of clinicians, and was proud to support those efforts. But going from 2 to 19 clinicians, when we have hundreds of thousands of residents across the city needing services, calling for a crisis response that often includes situations that we are not delivering the right services, we need to be fearless in reaching for the scale of change that our residents deserve. There have been far too many headlines about how deeply we need reforms when it comes to policing in Boston. I will ensure that this city continues to lead the way in demanding justice and healing, and doing so in partnership with community. That means leaning in on the pilot that I'm proud to see Mayor Janey already moving forward for a co-response model, for a response that centers mental health clinicians in this crisis response. But the bottom line is that the task force's recommendations echo the audit of the police department conducted many years ago, which echo the demands of our residents over decades and generations. What has been holding us back is political will to see changes at the scale that we need. I am the only candidate who has put forward a specific plan on how to negotiate that collective bargaining contract that will embed accountability and transparency.
Well, let me ask you for a clarification. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Is there a serious difference between your position and that of your opponent?
There are differences. This is a big difference when it comes to the vision for how public safety and public health in the city will move forward. We have had many votes on the city council where the two of us have been on different sides of whether we are moving towards reforms that build trust and bring people into the conversation, ensure that we are not pitting safety against justice. And this is a situation where we need to lean into the scale of change, unafraid of what our residents deserve.
Go ahead.
So I'm not sure whether Michelle answered the question regarding defunding the police, but what I will say is the co-response model that is in place today, that has been championed by the acting mayor, is a product of my work on the Boston City Council. We have those co-responders in place today. We have the crisis intervention training in place today because of my work on the City Council. That has created an opportunity for me to understand that work very clearly and to be able to lead on that work as mayor. Again, we do not have to wait for these reforms. It is up to the mayor to get it done, and I will, starting day one as mayor of this great city.
A final word from you, and then I want to move on.
I've had many conversations with Mayor Janey and colleagues, and proud to have the mayor's endorsement and support in this race to continue building on what the city has been doing. This is an issue where other cities are ahead of us, where cities around the country have started to have a response to create a different response to crisis that centers public health, not only slowly growing, something that we have been working on here, but truly delivering the services that our residents need, which would not only help us meet people where they're at, but also reflect a more responsible budget and use of resources so we can free up our resources in the ways that our residents actually need.
All right, you both talk. Go ahead, briefly.
I do have one more thing to say, because we talked about votes on the council. It was last year's budget, which we had a critical vote that Councilor Wu voted against. And if that budget failed, we would have lost 43 EMTs and paramedics, which are so critical to our response here in the city of Boston. In the middle of a pandemic, when people are sick, people are not well, people are afraid and in crisis, those paramedics and EMTs are also a very important partner in that co-response model. If we want these activities, these actions, these decisions to succeed, we need to invest in them. It takes money, it takes dollars, and it takes decisive decisions to make it happen.
That was a very specific claim that begs a response.
That's simply not true. Again, we don't need scare tactics in the city of Boston. We don't need false choices that pit our residents against each other or underestimate what is possible for this city. We need to be leading the way in ensuring that we are getting to the root causes of violence in our communities and ensuring that we are building trust with community members when it comes to safety and healing and public health. I will make sure that everyone is part of this conversation, sees themselves reflected, and that we are moving in the direction with urgency on what we need to change.
I'll give you 15 seconds if you
want.
want.
Very quickly, that urgency for me is day one of my administration. Okay. We have to put those recommendations into place if we truly want greater accountability, greater transparency, and greater diversity within the Boston Police Department. And we have to commit to the men and women who are doing the very important work, especially as it relates to EMS, especially as it relates to mental health clinicians in this city, and doing such amazing work.
And the same for you, if you want it.
We have seen differences in votes between the two of us on this stage. We have seen differences in approach when it comes to how we should fund and move forward. I am fighting for a vision of public safety and health in Boston that goes to the root causes of what our communities need in partnership with each one of our residents.
Well, you both mentioned this question of whether or not police should be responding to what are essentially mental health calls. And this next question's kind of related to that. We received a number of suggested questions from viewers about quality of life issues, ranging from loud late-night parties to unsafe trash dumping to dangerous behavior by dirt bikers, ATVs, and bicyclists. Councillor, will you start here? What's wrong with the status quo of how the city deals with these kinds of issues, and what exactly are you going to do to change it? 1 minute, please.
In many of these situations, it shouldn't be armed law enforcement officers who are responding to the situation. We need a response for community members, but moving towards a public health-led approach, moving towards a community de-escalation trained approach will ensure that we are freeing up resources in policing to where we really need those resources. You can talk to residents across our communities and hear that response times often aren't what residents need and doesn't inspire confidence that the police force is necessarily waiting and ready to respond in the way that our residents deserve. And so we need to ensure that we are directing our dollars to the right places. We need to invest more in the system of public safety and public health together, but that means being very intentional about how our resources are used, and especially to look at those instances where we could be freeing up our resources and allocating them much more efficiently.
Councillor Essaibi George, 1 minute.
I am committed as mayor of this city to do that very important work around quality of life issues here in the city of Boston. When we think about some of the challenges that each one of our neighbors are facing, whether family, whether young person, whether one of our senior citizens, we have so much work to do in each one of our neighborhoods to provide the appropriate response. When family members, when loved ones, when our city's residents, old and young, are calling 911, they are looking for help. They are not looking for a delayed response. We need to make sure that our police department, we need to make sure that our mental health providers, we need to make sure that our 311 call center is equipped to respond to the needs of our city's people. And too often, if our city's residents are waiting, it has turned into a crisis. We need to make sure that we are protecting the well-being and safety of all of our city's residents during that time.
Rebuttal.
Investing our resources in the right ways means being proactive about these issues and not just having a reactive approach in city government. In many cases, it is too late by the time someone calls. If we could have helped avoid a situation with housing being lost or a mental health situation getting intense, we need to be providing mental health supports for our residents across the city with every bit of the infrastructure that we're touching people's lives, through our schools, through our community health centers, through public housing. Boston should be wrapping our residents around with services. That is the bread and butter of what it means to be in city government, that you don't have to choose between getting it right at the ground level for the day-to-day needs of our residents and ensuring we're getting to tackle systemic root causes.
Equal time.
I want to say Boston needs to wrap those services around its people. That is what I have done as a city councilor. I have worked to ensure that we are supporting our community health centers. I'm the longest serving member on the board of directors for Dot House Health, and I'm grateful for that opportunity to serve in that capacity. I have done the work to make sure that we have mental health supports in each one of our Boston public schools. I am doing the work to make sure that we have a mental health co-response when a family member is calling 911 for help. And through that effort, I've also worked to make sure that we have a clinician in the 911 call center that is trained to respond for our high utilizers of 911, to be more proactive. We can talk about the work or we can do the work. I am committed to doing the work that I have led on as a member of the City Council.
I'm going to again exercise my discretion to step in here because I think this kind of veered off into a different discussion than the question raised. We're talking about quality of life issues. You both know the broken windows theory of community policing, that if a window gets broken on a block and you let it stay broken, it can lead to further deterioration and crime on that block. If there's calls on a summer night about, gangs of kids on dirt bikes keeping people awake and terrorizing the residents of the city, Councillor Wu, let's start with you. What will Mayor Wu exert a zero tolerance policy on these? What will you do differently?
Look, here's another example of how we can't be reacting to a situation where our systems, in fact, have already failed. The City of Boston has buildings, we have services, we have resources. We should be making sure that our young people have somewhere to go to safely have fun into the night, that our buildings and community centers don't close at 3 p.m. or 5 p.m., but that we are putting resources into partnering with community-led organizations to ensure that we are building those spaces and building community, because ultimately that is what the root causes of violence, of safety is connecting our residents with opportunity and making sure that we are giving our young people every possible chance to thrive.
Okay, that was one idea. Go ahead.
I think it's also important for the mayor of this city, the chief executive of this city, the leader of this city, to also do the little things that maybe aren't considered broad vision or big goals or fancy. We need to fill potholes, we need to repair sidewalks, we need to make sure the trash gets picked up and the lights get turned on every single evening, that we are fulfilling not just the basic city services, which lead to a high quality of life in this city, but that we are responding quickly and doing that work. It's not fancy, but it's important.
Go briefly, please.
Each one of our plans that we've put out comes from the little details that are affecting people's lives and that are stressing Boston residents across the city. When I talk about a Boston Green New Deal, that means doubling the number of street trees in Boston so that we are providing temperatures that are livable, that we are cleaning the air. When I talk about a Green New Deal, it's shifting to electric school buses to get diesel pollution out of the lungs of our young people in our neighborhoods. This is about the day-to-day that we can only fix if we're actually getting to the scale of where the issues are across the city.
All right, let's move on now to another issue. Again, we're talking about city services, and to some extent we're talking about finances and how to pay for all this. Each year, you'll start here, Councillor Essaibi George. Each year, the City of Boston asks for voluntary payments in lieu of taxes from tax-exempt local institutions that benefit from city services, but the response falls well short of the voluntary goals the city sets. The most recent report shows out of 22 schools and colleges the city asked for payments, only 3 paid 100% of the requested amount. More than half paid 68% or less, and 3 paid 0. Is that good enough for you? And if it isn't, what will you do to squeeze more out of them?
There's a commercial sometimes on that talks about, is that good enough? That is not good enough. That's why over the course of this campaign, I've made a few promises that I'm able to keep. And one of those promises is, in my first 100 days, I will reconvene the pilot task force that hasn't been brought together in over 10 years to renegotiate that payment in lieu of taxes, to reevaluate property values, to make sure that they are fulfilling the commitment to community benefits in a way that includes community discussion and work, and that we are looking at jobs. Our city's residents need access to the workforce, need access to employment, need access to high livable wages in this city. And I want our nonprofit partners, our institutions in this city, our meds and eds and cultural institutions to do that work. That's why I've committed in that first 100 days that I'll bring them together to do that.
Councillor Wu, 1 minute.
I fully agree that we need accountability for our large partners across the city, and that conversations about paying a fair share and chipping in for resources, especially when there's tremendous pressure on housing in the city, when we don't see enough on-campus student housing, and other conversations need to be direct and need to be immediate. I want to point out that there are many, many resources that we're leaving on the table when we don't have a proactive vision for how city government should be pushing and leading the charge. In my time on the council, we passed legislation that would ensure that the money that the city is spending, the contract dollars, on the order of $660 million a year, that this would be equitably spent, going to locally owned businesses, going to businesses owned by Black and brown entrepreneurs. We have already started to partner with hospitals and universities to ensure that the spending that these neighbors and large anchor institutions are doing also reflects and feeds into that vision, so that we can just multiply the impact. These institutions are not only providing services like healthcare and education, they are employers in the city. They are spending money in our economy. We need to make sure that there is a vision where we can all work together.
Rebuttal briefly, please.
We also very simply need to make sure that they're inviting our kids for admission. I had the honor to attend Boston University for free because my dad was a security guard there. As an immigrant, he came to this country looking for opportunity for himself and for his children. And that opportunity to work there so that his children could attend that university was a tremendous benefit to me and to our family. It's also important to make sure that that employees at Boston University and any institution like my dad don't have to work doubles to put food on the table for their families. We need to make sure that it's not entry-level jobs and employment opportunities, that it's mid-level executive and leadership roles.
Equal time if you want it.
This is an opportunity right now, as we are reshaping our economy, as we're thinking about the future, for each one of our institutions to be partners. We need to have conversations, for example, as changes are happening in Alston. It was years of advocacy and conversation with our large institutions there that have finally led to a decision to take down that highway structure that had been dividing our communities and keeping people apart, committing to funding a more sustainable, more livable way of transportation and connecting communities. That needs to be the conversation where the mayor of Boston isn't just sitting back and leaning in to ask for payments now and then, but ensuring that we're having that larger conversation about how we grow together as a city.
All right. I do want to move on here and try to fit in one more question, if you don't mind. We'd be remiss, I think, if we didn't mention the pandemic that's been smothering our economy and frightening many Bostonians. According to city health officials, 72% of city residents have had at least one dose of the COVID vaccine. 65% are fully vaccinated. To reach the relative safety of so-called herd immunity, we need to, it's estimated, be up around 85%. We're not even close. Eileen writes in with a question. Are you satisfied that we're doing everything we can to reach herd immunity level? And if not, what else are you going to do about it when you get in? Councillor Wu, 1 minute.
Thank you, Eileen. This is continuing to be a top urgent priority. We are still very much in the midst of a global pandemic, and I have spoken out forcefully that we need to ensure every possible place we are providing protections for our workers and for the general public, especially as we're getting close to seeing the vaccine approved for younger children. Our Boston Public Schools must be that platform where we are reaching every single family from all generations, using that bit of connection to community everywhere we can find it, again, through schools, through community centers, through public housing, to ensure that we can close these gaps and make Boston a city where our economy doesn't have to be pitted against public health, because we are ending this pandemic.
Councillor Essaibi, George, 1 minute.
I agree very much with Michelle there. We need to meet our city's residents where they are. We've got to get shots in arms. We've got to make sure that the information and the education is shared widely in culturally competent ways, using the languages that our city's residents speak, and that we as a city are establishing pipelines of trust, communication, knowledge, information with our city's people, with our city's workforce, to share how important this is if we are to keep our economy going.
Are you both okay with this week's suspension without pay of dozens of city workers who failed to meet the deadline for getting a vaccine? Councillor Wu?
We need to ensure that city government is not just protecting our general public and constituents and our workers, but setting the tone for what it means to have that accountability. We will ensure that we're closing that gap and moving quickly to help support city workers and all community members who still need to be vaccinated. One example of how to do so is really partnering with community-led organizations. The Black Boston COVID-19 Coalition has done an amazing job ensuring that we were closing gaps in some of our communities that had the greatest burden from COVID-19. That should continue to be the model that we are leaning in, not only with requirements, but to support in community.
Equal time.
Yeah, I want to say I'm disappointed and hopeful that we can get through that number, just over 800 city employees who have not yet been vaccinated. But I want to use this moment in time to thank the men and women who work for the city of Boston, who have been on the front line, who have been present, who have been engaged, and who have been doing the very important work during what's been a terribly scary time. As mayor, I will work with you to make sure that we have open lines of communication, that we have opportunities to discuss what worries you, and that we can work together to establish the trust necessary to make sure that you are doing all you can to be healthy. I want you back to work. I want you back engaged with our city's residents. I want you back providing the critical services that you do every single day. We need you vaccinated. We need you back to work.
All right, we don't have a ton of time left, but I'm going to squeeze in one more because I'm the moderator and I can. And we'll start with you, Councillor Essaibi George. Was Marty Walsh a good mayor, a bad mayor, or somewhere in between? And what'll be the biggest difference between your mayoralty and his? Take about 45 seconds, if you would.
I will. I think that Mayor Walsh, now Secretary Walsh, was a good mayor, especially thinking about the end of his time leading this city through a pandemic, through an uncertain time, through scary times. What I bring that's very different from Marty Walsh to the table is my 13 years of experience in the classroom, my work building a business, my efforts as a member of the City Council leading on issues like family homelessness. There's so much work we have to do, to continue, and to do in a very different way, and I look forward to doing that as Mayor Essaibi George.
Councillor Wu, same question.
Mayor Walsh is a strong leader for our city, and we are all so excited to see that Boston is represented with his leadership at the federal level now. Over the last decade, Boston has seen tremendous pressures growing on our residents. Our housing crisis, the pandemic, jobs, transportation system, our schools. I will make sure that we are not just continuing to take baby steps towards where we need to go, but lean into the power that city government has to bring everyone into the conversation and deliver on the scale of changes, the bold changes that we need in the city for this generation, but for future generations as well.
Candidates, thank you both. That concludes tonight's debate. And now a reminder to all of you who vote in the city of Boston. Early voting begins on Saturday, October 23rd and runs through Friday, October 29th. The last day to apply for a mail-in ballot is Wednesday, October 27th. You can drop off those ballots in any City of Boston drop box up until 8 p.m. on Election Day, November 2nd. The polls are open from 7 to 8. Cast your vote, then watch it count on WBZ and CBSN Boston's election night coverage. Thank you for watching.
From the 125th running of the Boston Marathon.
After a 2.5-year wait, it feels so good to be back with you.
What a special day.
And they're off. Who among them will break the tape?
I've never seen anything like this.
That is what makes this day so magical. Manuel Ashar.
Marcel